Hello, I'm Catherine Ross, and I'm going to speak to you for a few minutes about the environment, how it affects our church buildings, and net zero carbon. You probably know that General Synod has set us a target of getting to net zero by 2030. So I'm going to touch on the bigger picture, spend most of my time talking about how to get to net zero carbon, and then touch briefly on the sustainability of all projects, climate change adaptation, biodiversity, and finally, where you might want to go to get advice and support. In terms of the bigger picture, it's clear in these words from Justin Welby how important it is, how essential it is that we take action to reduce the causes of climate change, and how integral it is to our role as the Church of England. It's built there into the marks of mission of the Church of England, the fifth mark of mission, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. The Church has had an environmental programme going back a long way, since 2006. And then in February 2020, General Synod put forward their landmark motion that we should aim for net zero carbon by 2030. All of this in the context that Synod was very aware of the climate crisis, of the fact that there is global heating, mainly caused by man-made factors, that's leading to more extreme weather events around the world, and that those are impacting often on the people of the poorest countries of the world. We already have a 1.1 degree temperature rise on average, and even with the Paris climate commitments, we're on track for 3 degrees of global heating. The science is clear that we need to radically reduce emissions. The main scientific report, the IPCC report, says that we need to have halved emissions by 2030 and be at net zero by 2030. And meantime, it's clear from research that biodiversity is crashing around the world, with facts that it's hard to imagine. We're told that 1 million species are at risk of extinction. So everything points towards the need for action. So where do we start? What does that mean for us in the Church of England? I think it's always important to remember that we actually have buildings which are uniquely sustainable, although they do have unique issues. This picture is St Martin's in Canterbury, possibly the oldest church in England that's been continuously used as a church since at least the 6th century, possibly the 4th century. The Church of England can very fairly claim to have some of the most sustainable buildings in Britain. They're still fulfilling the role for which they were originally built centuries later. And the most sustainable buildings are one which are already built, because the embodied carbon of a new construction of a building is very high. And because of that, it means that it's really important we find ways to keep the buildings that we already have adapting and able to meet modern needs so that our buildings can continue to fulfill their purpose. Our buildings have some advantages. They have a high thermal mass, they have high solar gain through the big windows, they often have room for planting around, but they do have issues. They are listed buildings, many of them, fragile interiors, often only used for a few hours a week, which makes heating a particular challenge. They've got single glazed windows, and those windows are of such beauty and importance that we don't want to double glaze them. They've got sweeping high ceilings into which we know heat rises. Our churches need a really positive vision of what a zero carbon church might look like, and they also need really good professional advice about what parts of any journey toward net zero are relevant for them. If you go onto our website, into the Net Zero Carbon Church section of our website, you'll find these pictures which show you the outside of a church and the inside of a church, and they take you through. You can click on each feature and it describes that feature, and it takes you through to guidance about that. And we hope that that will help provide churches with useful information. But of course, everything is on a case-by-case basis, so they really need local support to help them think through what is right in their particular circumstances. We have, nationally, we have a piece of guidance called our Practical Path to Net Zero, which is just 2 sides of A4. It's deliberately kept very short. It breaks things down into where do we start, and these are hopefully sort of no regret actions, things like switching to a green electricity tariff, things which are relevant even for low energy using Sunday churches. We've then got a section what next, and those are relevant for sort of medium energy using churches, perhaps a church used 3 to 4 times a week. Then you're getting onto the big projects, things like solar panels. These are relevant for our high energy using churches, our busy churches being used all week. And then there's a section called only if, which are projects which are relevant in particular circumstances. So for example, if you were re-roofing, that would be the time to insulate. If you go onto our website, you can find the practical path to net zero. And then we also have alongside that a checklist, a self-guided checklist that churches can use. There's 2 versions, one to print out or one to complete on a screen if that's what the church prefers. And we really recommend that you encourage your churches to complete the practical path to net zero before undertaking any of the kind of projects they might be coming to you about. Now, there are many areas where the environmental agenda and the heritage agenda join up beautifully. Things like fixing the broken windows and clearing the gutters, which are very good for both. But then there are 3 areas where it's likely that they're going to need more input to find their way through that combination of heritage and environment. One of that is about heating systems. So currently, most of our churches have space heating and most of our churches have either gas or oil. So those are the very fossil fuels which are contributing to global heating. Over time, we know if we're going to meet that net zero target, we need to gradually move away from fossil fuel based heating to lower carbon alternatives. But it's hard for a church to work out how to do that. How do you do that if you're not on the gas grid? How do you do that if you don't have a good electricity supply? What are the alternatives in terms of heat pumps for that church or moving to pew heating for that church? These are things that churches really need guidance and advice on a case-by-case basis. Solar panels, particularly visible solar panels. This is an area where we're beginning to get more applications coming through the system because churches see the potential for clean energy generation. And then insulation, and making sure that when insulation is done, it's being done in a way which, yes, tackles heat loss, but in a way that's appropriate for our historic buildings. So these are the kind of issues that you're likely to be dealing with in your DAC. Just to briefly touch on the sustainability of all projects. Sustainability isn't just about heating and solar panels, it's also about the kitchens and the bathrooms and the reorderings. You know, have they considered longevity? Have they considered the materials that are chosen? Have they considered, are they using local tradespeople? Are they reducing waste? Are they recycling the waste? These are the kind of questions that a DAC can be asking to make sure that they've been thought through. Because if you're putting in a new kitchen, whether it lasts for 15 years or 30 years, makes a massive difference to the environmental impact of that project. And then touching ever so quickly on climate change adaptation, it's a big subject. In short, this is about making sure that our buildings and our communities will be able to survive and adapt to a changing climate. And that means things like planning ahead for increasingly common extreme weather events. So for example, if they're replacing their rainwater goods, are they sized correctly for future rainfall? Are they thinking about flood prevention? Are they thinking about chalk swell and shrink if that's what their foundations are on? And is it relevant to be looking at protective renders to protect the stonework of the building from increasingly extreme weather? Biodiversity, again, I'm just going to touch on. We know our churches are havens, both for wildlife and for people. They offer refuges for wildlife and plant life, because often they're the only undisturbed land in the area. And they offer the potential for carbon sequestration through trees and plants and the management of the soil. But they're also havens for people. In some of our urban areas, they're the only green breathing space available. We've got some projects going on at the moment, which I won't take the time to go into in this video, but we've got Churches Count on Nature, Bats in Churches, the National Burial Ground Survey, and the Beautiful Burial Ground Project. And I'd be very happy to tell you more about those. In terms of suggested first steps, you know, where to go to for resources and help, I'd really suggest that you meet early on with your diocesan environment officer and talk to them about how their work and your work joins up. and equally the chair of your environmental working group. Often DACs will have a link into their local environmental working group, and I think it's really positive where that happens. Find out who your heating and sustainability advisors are on your DAC, and if you don't have them, do you need them? Then there are some key documents, and we'll send these out to you after today's meeting. And finally, we've got a whole series of net zero carbon webinars, which are designed to be technical briefings for non-technical people. We've covered a whole load of topics: solar panels, church heating, electric car charging, and far more. We've also got webinars coming up in June on land and nature, a whole series of 12 different topics. And we have a series of webinars on eco-church. So there's a lot there that you can do in terms of your own development or the continuous professional development of your team. Thank you very much. Here are my contact details. I'd be very happy to help you in any way that I can.